This video is going to teach you how to make a character in Along the Leyline. Let's jump in. To get started, make sure you have your copy of the Player's Tome. If you would like more options, make sure you have the Player's Expansion ready for you as well. This video is going to walk you through the basics of creating a character in Along the Leyline. We will be using the life path character generation for this video. However, if you want to just get a quick character, there is quick start rules in the book that you can follow. In addition, there are pre-generated characters available to you underneath the quick start rule set that you can download now for free on DriveThruRPG. Link in the description below. But if you want more character options and more customizable backgrounds, this video is for you. Let's jump in. You're going to want to print off a character sheet for this video. Make sure you have some dice handy, D4s, D6s, D8s, and some pencils or some pens available. If you want, there is a form fillable version of the character sheet on DriveThruRPG. It is for free. You will need to type in the different feats, but everything else has checkboxes for you, and it makes it really easy if you want to make this a digital version. To follow along, go to page 45 to get started. This has an overview of everything that you're going to need to do in the life path character generation. You'll start by choosing a species, then you will have some birth events which will tell you a little bit about your family when you were born. You'll grow up and have some childhood events which will give you some stats and develop your character. Then you will choose an apprenticeship which will have some more details and give your character some more stat changes. Then you will choose your class. Lastly, you will choose your equipment by buying equipment from the starting equipment table. There are some bonus things that you can do at the end, like choosing your first adventure if you want to have a bit of a seasoned adventurer, or writing down all your ties and convictions. As we go through this life path character generation, there will be different tables that you can roll on, which will give you some seeds for building your character. Some of those will include allies and enemies that you can write down in your background, which will allow your referee to pull from for narrative purposes. Okay, starting out, we need to choose a species. A species is going to give you some specials that are unique to the biology of that species. So every single species has different biology. They could have different limbs, different ways that they are built, which gives them these special abilities. If you look in the player's expansion, there are a lot more species options, some of which give your characters new senses or different kinds of limbs. For instance, you could be playing the Batfolk and they have wings for arms so they can fly, but while they're flying, they can't hold things. So let's choose a species. In the Player's Tome, you can choose between humans, dwarves, orcs, elves, halflings, and fairies. Each of them have different specials which you will need to add to your character sheet, and then you're going to need to roll for HP and MP. If you look at the top of the page for each kind of species, you'll see a little heart that says HP. It'll say something like 5d6 or 7d4. The first number is how many dice you need to roll, and the second number is going to be the kind of dice that you roll. So for humans, you roll 5 separate d6 dice, add them all together, and that will be their starting HP. You will do the same thing for MP, which, if you look at the species sheet, has a little brain on it, and next to that MP brain, you'll see a die number. It's usually 1 or 2 dice. Characters usually start off with a lot fewer MP than they do for HP. Now that you have your character chosen and the HP and MP and specials added to your character sheet, it's time to go to your birth event. You Are Born starts on page 55, and it goes through some important information, particularly about size. Size is going to change a couple of things about your character. It's going to change how much stuff they can carry, and it's going to change how well they can hide. On the extreme ends of size, so if you're really, really small, if you're tiny, it's going to give you advantage on acrobatics checks and disadvantage on athletic checks. And if you're huge, it's going to be flipped. You'll have advantage on athletics checks and disadvantage on acrobatics checks. Once you choose your character's size, make sure to add any benefits like advantage on athletics or acrobatics, and limit the number of your backpack, your carrying capacity. So all character sheets start out with 6 different slots because that's the max, but a medium-sized character is only going to be able to have 4 things in their pack. Now that you have your character's size down, let's roll for birth event. This is going to give you some details about your family as you grew up. On page 56, you can find a table to roll on. You'll roll 1d10. Let's imagine you rolled a 2. You were abandoned and raised as an orphan. Describe who raised you. So this is an opportunity for you to write down things on your character sheet to give your character a little bit more background. Once you have your birth event, you can also roll for birth sign. Birth sign is how the society around you viewed you as you grew up. It's not necessarily how your character is, it's just their superstitious view of you while you were growing up. For birth sign, roll 1d12. Look at the chart and you can note that on your character sheet. For instance, if you got a 10, it says full moon. You are associated with monsters and the wild. You will conquer them or they will conquer you. This is how the society views you. Now that you have your birth event and your birth sign, it's time to roll for your birth location. If you look on page 59 of the player's tome, it will have a small chart. You're going to roll a d10. If you get 1 through 3, you will be born in a rural area, 4 through 6 in a suburban area, 7 through 8 an urban area, 9 or 10 a palace. This is going to do a couple of things. Depending on where you're born, you're going to get an advantage and a disadvantage. If you're born in a rural area, your advantage will be in environmental skills, so you'll pick one of the environmental skills like stealth or athletics or acrobatics, and you'll always have advantage in that skill. Then if you're in the rural area, social is going to be your disadvantage. You'll have a disadvantage in one of the social skills. Maybe it's deception, maybe it's persuasion, maybe it's barter, but always whenever you roll for that skill, you'll roll at a disadvantage. If you rolled for suburban, you'll have an advantage in environmental and a disadvantage in environmental. And in that case, you can actually choose the same skill and cancel it out. You can do the same thing for urban, which has an advantage in social and a disadvantage in social. You can cancel those out. If you got palace, you'll have an advantage in social and a disadvantage in environmental. Now that you have your childhood location and you've added an advantage and a disadvantage to your character sheet, it's time to choose a language. Every single character in Along the Leyline has trade. This is an important point of the game. It allows you to play the game and interact with everybody in the game. However, that doesn't mean language is useless in Along the Leyline. Language adds a lot of flavor. It can allow you to talk and get more close and advantage with certain kinds of people who also speak that language. In addition, spell tomes are also written in a specific language. And if you don't know that language, then you can't learn that spell from that spell tome. So knowing lots of different languages opens up your character to gaining more knowledge. You can look on page 60 and 61 to find a list of the different kinds of languages. In Along the Leyline, there are language trees, which you can see them grouped together. If you look underneath trade languages, you'll find trade, Halflingish, and Hume. If you know one of those languages, you also know some of the other, and you come across one of them, you can attempt to glean some information. You won't get the full picture, but you will be able to understand at least a little bit. If you don't know the full language, it's basically just a D100 roll under system. The more you know in the language, the easier it is to understand. Now that you know your starting language, it's time to roll for childhood social status. This is going to determine your starting gold. In addition, if you grew up in the lower class, you also get a secret. Secrets can be used to change the game and gain knowledge. You can cash them in to change the story and the setting. You can also use them to find out about special treasure hoards. So starting off low doesn't mean that you start off with nothing. And sometimes lower social class statuses will actually end up with more money to start with because you're going to be rolling a D100. This can also give you lots of role-playing opportunities because if you grew up in the elite class but you only have 5 gold, you're going to have to explain where all the money went. Alternatively, if you grew up in the lower class but you've got 100 gold, you're going to need to explain how your family and you kept so much money. Now that you have your childhood social status, it's time to roll for an event. Childhood events are broken up based on their social status, so you'll need to find the correct table that matches with the social status that you rolled. The childhood social status will be in parentheses on the page for each table. There's a childhood event for lower class, middle class, upper class, and elite. Find the correct table and roll a D6. Then read and add the different things to your character sheet. Let's say you rolled the middle class and got a 3. We would look on the childhood event middle class. It says, you made lots of trades with local kids. Write down the name of one of them under the allies and describe the mundane trinket you received from them in a trade. Increase barter. So you're going to do 2 things for this particular one. You'll write down an ally on your character sheet. You'll give them a name and maybe a little bit of flavor and describe that character a bit. Then you'll also increase the die for barter. So you'll go from a D4 to a D6. All dice start at D4 except for dodge and saving throws. Everything else will begin at D4. Then once it increases, it moves to the next die size. Now that we have a bit of childhood background, it's time for your character to grow up and get to work. Apprenticeships are where your character starts working before they became an adventurer. Apprenticeships start on page 67. In the Player's Tome, there are several to choose from, and there are more in the Player's Expansion. In the Player's Tome, you can choose from Hard Labor, Trade Skills, Vagabond Past, Criminal Past, and High Labor. If you choose Hard Labor or a Trade Skill, there is a separate table to give you some background information to add more narrative oomph to your characters. Let's say we wanted to go into a trade skill, so we chose the apprenticeship trade skill, rolled our die, and got a 7. It says, Shopkeep Bartender. Increase barter, increase persuasion, increase unarmed. So if we're going with our character from before, who already had an increase in barter, that will increase again and we'll start off with a D8 in barter. Then we'll increase persuasion to have that at a D6, and unarmed also to a D6. But that doesn't give us a whole lot of flavor, which means we should roll on the hard labor / trade skill event table to give us more information about our character. Let's say we rolled a 7 again. You befriended an old sage who guided you during your apprenticeship. Describe the sage and one thing they did or said that helped you. Add the old sage to your allies. So now we have our friend that we traded with as a kid and this old sage as our allies. It's giving us a little bit of background information that we can use later when we play the game. We've chosen our apprenticeship. We've got a little bit of background information about our character. Now it's time for us to choose our class. In Along the Leyline, classes are comprised of a set of feats. To start off, you will choose 3 different feats. Feats are broken up in the book in classes to make it easier for you. The classes follow specific archetypes and tropes in typical fantasy genres. However, in Along the Leyline, you're not restricted to pulling all of your feats from the same class. While all of the feats in one class will work together, you can freely choose feats from anywhere. In addition, at the end of the section of class, there are additional feats which don't really fit to any particular trope, but are helpful to build more varied and unique characters. Let's take a quick dive into the different kinds of classes and their different tropes to help you choose which one works best for you. We will only be looking at the characters in the player's tome, but there are more in the player's expansion. The first class is Knight Errant. Knight Errants are warriors and fighters. They're good at melee combat and ranged combat and martial weapons. They're not really skilled in casting or magics, but that's okay. They're scrappy kinds of characters. Knight Errant actually has 2 pages of feats because I wanted to give lots of different options for you to choose from. When Knight Errants attack, they can get a special thing when they attack with Flourish, which allows them to jump from chandeliers, disarm their opponents, kick people back, anything the character can imagine. They just need to call a roll. Whenever they attack, they roll odd or even, and if they call their roll correctly, then they get the special boon they called. This allows Knight Errants to do lots of different things in combat. I highly recommend choosing that feat if you're going to be playing a Knight Errant. The next class we're going to look at is Ascetics, warrior monks. They're able to run up walls, do special unarmed attacks. Their shtick is that they don't use a shield. So if you're going to be playing an ascetic, don't equip a shield. Instead, try to dodge all attacks. The next class is Scoundrels. These are roguish, thieving type characters, and they're really good at sneaking around and dealing extra damage when they're hidden. Next is the Hunter. Hunters are really good at navigation nature. They can explore areas and find different places. In addition, in combat, they're really great at ranged weapons. They can call shots and deal extra damage. Next is the Berserker. Berserkers can go hog wild in combat and just straight up attack. They can forsake dodging and blocking to do extra damage and hit the enemy. If you're going to be a Berserker, I highly recommend taking Berserk and Shrug It Off. They're 2 great feats to get you started. Now let's look at Divine Channeler. Divine Channelers don't do any magic themselves. Instead, they look to a higher power or some kind of ideal that they ascribe to. And this strong conviction gives them power. They're able to channel that strong conviction to gain bonuses on the things they do, if it's related to their conviction. Let's imagine you have a character who strongly believes that you should take care of the sick. If this is their conviction die, or they worship a god of light and healing, then anytime they're doing a medicine check, anytime they're helping and trying to heal, they can use their conviction dice. Conviction dice starts at a D4, and you can add it to the roll. So if they're rolling for medicine, they'll roll their medicine skill, and then they will also roll their conviction, and then add the 2 up. This allows Divine Channelers to be really good at healing, or really anything, because you could also have a Divine Channeler be devoted to warrior, and be devoted to fighting. So anytime they attack, they can also add their conviction die to the roll. That sounds really overpowered, and it is. But it's also possible for Divine Channelers to lose this conviction die. If they roll a 1 on the conviction die, they lose that conviction die until they take a complete rest. That means their HP, MP, and saving throws have gone up all the way to max, and they spent a full night resting. If you want to play a character with strong convictions that can do lots of different things related to those specific convictions, Divine Channeler is right for you. Let's talk about Clairvoyance. Clairvoyants have sorcery and can use all different kinds of magic. If you haven't already watched our video about how to use magic in Along the Leyline, I highly recommend watching it. It will explain how sorcerers work and how they're different from sages. Sorcerers have an innate understanding of magic and can do anything they want in a 1 meter cube. Sages, on the other hand, memorize spells and are able to cast them from memory. What really sets sages apart from sorcerers is power for flexibility. Clairvoyants are able to do lots of different things, but not very powerful things, whereas sages can amplify spells and make them even more dangerous. If you look at spells, some of them will have an amp section. When you amp spells, you can do the bonuses underneath the amp section, but you must have the amp feat first. Sages have this feat. If you want to take spell amp, make sure you have already selected spell casting first. In Along the Leyline, you're not restricted to a specific class to pick a feat, but some feats have prerequisites. Make sure you have the prerequisite before you choose that advanced feat. For spell amp, you'll need spell casting first. The next 3 classes all focus in on doing magic a little bit differently. Instead of using the normal Arcana dice to cast spells, these classes all use a different kind of saving throw. Thaumaturges will use mind saving throws. Blood mages will use body saving throws, and hermits use spirit saving throws. In addition to add different flavor, each of them have a special, unique way of casting those spells. However, when they fail a spell check, then their save dice drops. So it's a little bit of risk for a lot of reward. If you've looked through the classes and none of those seem to really fit the character you're trying to build, check out the additional feats or the different classes underneath the player's expansion. You've got your feats, but now there's one last place we need to make sure is filled on your character sheet, and that's your starting equipment. Remember earlier when you rolled for your starting gold? You'll want to have that gold ready now, and look on page 92, which has a table that you can buy different items to start with. I recommend getting some armor. Poor armor costs 40 gold to start with, but it's going to give you protection. If you don't have any armor on and you're dealt any kind of damage, that damage is doubled. So armor is crucial in Along the Leyline. If you get some more fancy armor, you can also gain resistances to specific kinds of damage types. If you're not sure what else you need, grab some dungeon gear. Dungeon gear is an item that can change based on what you need it to be. You need a crowbar, the dungeon gear becomes the crowbar. You need a bit of rope, it becomes the bit of rope. Any kind of mundane item, the dungeon gear can be exchanged for in the dungeon. So you don't have to choose before you go into the dungeon the different specific items that you need. Your characters are specific adventurers, they know what they're doing, they know what they would be bringing with you, but you as the player might not know what you would need. So dungeon gear helps fill this gap. If you want to do a little bit more character building, you can look on page 94 and 95. 94 has a table that will give you your first adventure. If you don't want to be a freshly seasoned character coming out of their apprenticeship, out to explore the world and being an adventurer, you'll want to roll on your first adventure table on page 94. Page 95 gives you a little bit more information about how to build your background dealing with enemies and allies. If you don't have any enemies and allies, that's okay. It's not necessary to start with them. However, if you do, it's great to share your enemies and allies with your referee so they can maybe incorporate them into the game when narratively appropriate. This video has taken you from birth to ready, fully fleshed character, ready to start your first game. If you don't already have Along the Leyline, you can grab it from DriveThruRPG, link in the descriptions below. If you want more character options, check out the Player's Expansion. Thank you for watching. Appreciate you guys. Keep gaming.